Yes, good evening. Good evening to all. Today is the 29th of September, Monday, 8:30 p.m. It is now time for Detroit in Black and White with Eric Brown. Reality Strikes here. And my guest for the evening is uh, Brandon Brandon Bryce, a fellow Detroiter. Before I start the show, though, and give the topics, I want to give a shout out to a friend of mine that just passed, and his funeral services was yesterday out at Oakland University. Dr. Glenn McIntosh, who was the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as the vice president of student affairs, a great guy, a man of Omega Psi Phi, which myself and Brandon can relate to. We are members of the Black Greek Letter Organization family. Myself, a Kappa. Brandon is an Alpha. And I've been knowing Brandon for about 8 years now, 10 years.
Yeah, about 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to thank you for coming on and joining me this evening. We have some very interesting topics that I'm sure will ignite some fire in, the conversation, as well as those that are watching. I want to thank Mr. 1213 for joining me this evening. If you are joining, Detroit in Black and White presents Reality Strikes with Eric Brown. As always, like, subscribe, and share. And the topics, I sent them to you earlier, Brandon. There are three topics I want to get to tonight that are very important, that I feel, with regards to the state of Detroit and moving forward. And those three topics are the Detroit City Charter and ethics. There's a recent situation that has caught the attention of a lot of people, and I want to talk about that by talking specifically about the Detroit City Charter that was voted on by the people on the 8th of November 2011, and it went into effect on the 1st of January 2012. And again, this is something that the people adopted. The people, the electorate, went to the ballot box, and it don't matter if it was a 4% turnout that day on November the 8th, 2011. Whoever went to the ballot box made the decision for the citizens of Detroit with regards to the city charter. I want to thank Jill Sheridan for joining us this evening as well. The second topic will be, Detroit will have a new mayor come January 1st, 2026. And will he or she be judged differently than the current mayor? And that's a conversation that has been bandied about lately. And then the final topic, it was an article and op-ed piece actually in the Detroit Free Press, and it spoke to mayoral hopefuls showing signs of Kwame-style lapses. So that, and I sent that to you earlier too, Brandon. That in and of itself is interesting. And then the second topic, again, a new mayor. That was an article written in the Detroit Free Press by, and I think you know him as well, Brandon, Darren Nichols, who's a journalist, well-renowned and respected journalist in the Detroit area. He does freelance work for the Detroit Free Press. His article was very, very interesting. We'll get to that in a second. But again, the article was titled with regards to whether or not the new mayor will be judged differently than the current mayor. So again, that speaks in and of itself. And I give you opportunity, about 30 seconds, to introduce yourself or reintroduce yourself to the audience, because you are now no longer living in the Detroit area, though you will always be a native Detroiter.
That's right.
Your family, I know, is from, the South and migrated up north to Michigan and Detroit. So give the audience a remembrance of who Brandon Bryce is.
So first of all, folks, always glad to be on The Bryce is Right. I'm here with my main man, Eric Brown. We've been cool for a long time because we've been in the struggle of trying to get Detroiters to wake up. I have, again, my family hails from the South, and, we are true Detroiters, West Warren and Daniels. It doesn't get more Detroit than that. But it's interesting because you were talking about the city and the new mayor. And let me say this, I'm not going to say I support one over the other, but I will say that this is a time for Detroiters to start thinking about the future. And it's interesting because I think you have two mayors with two mayoral candidates with two very different perspectives, two very different experiences. And I think it's a time where Detroit is at play, yet Detroit still has immense poverty on the east side. And so my questions for the next mayor, whoever that may be, I've had the pleasure to meet them both. They're both good people. But this is not about good people. If I want to meet good people, I'll go to the lounge. I'll go to church. This is about who do you trust with the future of Detroit's $3 billion budget. And we've got to be wise. We've got to be vigilant. We've got to look at people's past and understand who they are. We've got to look at their associations. And because that tells you a lot about who that specific candidate may be. I think on the one end, it would be great to see the first female mayor in Detroit history. I'm all for people having an opportunity to shine and to be represented. And I think it's past due date for a woman to lead the city. However, management is going to play a big role in this upcoming election and who the next mayor is. The last mayor, who I believe just got married today, shockingly, the last mayor led the DNC, which is a major operation. And so it wasn't a shock that if you could lead the DNC, you could lead the city of Detroit. And so, Ken Locke, who also good man, I know him, manages churches and he manages people. And that's an important skill to have. And so they both bring very unique talents. But either way it goes, the next mayor is going to have to deal with a possible Republican governor and is going to have to deal with possibly Donald Trump, the president of the United States. And that's where the rubber meets the road. Eric, Mike Tyson, the great fighter and poet, once said, everybody has a plan until you get punched. So what I want to know is when you get punched, because you will, whether that's Reverend Ken Locke or Council President Sheffield, what's your plan?
And the punches has already started, Brandon, and welcome Karen Winston to the program as a viewer, because the situation as relates to the charter, people need to understand the charter was something that the electorate voted on. The charter is something that needs to be respected. The charter went into effect on, again, January 1st, 2012. It speaks specifically on page 19, section 2-106.4, gifts and gratuities. And I bring that up because there was a situation with a concert that was here recently where it has come out that the current council president asked for the tickets. Originally, it was stated that they were given to her, but it's been confirmed that she asked for them, and that violates the charter. That violates the ethics portion of the charter. And I think people need to understand, you want to have, people are going to make mistakes. We know that. We're human. People are going to make mistakes, but it's hard to overlook. And I think people need to be careful about overlooking. You mentioned about having the first female mayor in the city of Detroit. We have to get beyond first and focus on who's the best for the job. History is being made all the time, but is history something that supersedes selecting the right person to fill this role? And again, I don't have a dog in the fight. I don't live in Detroit. I know both of them. But we also have to understand warning signs pop up when situations like what happened with the Jeezy concert situation matter took place. And again, the charter specifically states a public servant shall not accept gifts, gratuities, honorarium, or other things of value from any person or company doing business or seeking to do business with the city. So the excuse that they're saying is that Comerica Bank, for which he got these tickets from, does not currently do business with the city of Detroit. Again, tomato, because who knows, they might do business with the city in the future. So I think, people have to understand that, and it's not even a fine line as far as I'm concerned, because Comerica Bank has done business with the city in the past. And again, it specifically says you shall not accept gifts. And it go on further to say, from any person or company doing business or seeking to do business with the city is seeking official action from the city, has interests that could substantially affect it by the performance of the public service official duties, or is registered as a lobby under applicable laws. It says this prohibition shall not apply to an award publicly presented to a public servant. It was not an award. Complimentary copies of trade publication, books, reports, pamphlets, calendars, periodicals, or other informational materials. So again, the city charter is clear.
Let me say this, Eric. These are the things, again, Reverend Kinloch is not a politician.
Neither is his wife, because that's another issue.
But it does not excuse, in the court of law, I don't know, doesn't fly. Mary is a politician. And so if this is true, I would hope that it would have been handled professionally. Now, I will say this, if it's true, I think she needs to, acknowledge what it is, because again, this is where leadership comes in. And again, whether you are for or against, I'm not going to get into that, but, be steadfast to address the issue at hand. If it says in the charter that you can't do it, then you can't do it.
Right. And to your point, Brandon, look at the comment. Can you see the comment on the screen right now from Karen Winston?
Her dad commented on one of my favorites, said it's libelous. So, however, he didn't deny she got the gifts. Well, here's the thing. Tomato. We won't get into the claims, but what I will say is if it happened, address it. And if it did not happen, because again, it's politics. I mean, people, what people don't realize about politics is anything you do,
somebody watching
you run for office, it's coming to the light, whether you say it or somebody else says it. So it's always best, if it's true, it's always best for you to own it and create the narrative before your opponent does. Now, is it, did that happen? We don't know. And I won't speculate here because, again, I think they both have advantages. But what I will say is what I'm waiting on is a debate. I don't care about Jeezy tickets. I don't care about any of that. I want to know, again, like I told you before, Eric, with $3 billion of the city's money, my folks still live in the city. Where and what is your plan as mayor? Because I think what happens is we look at all of these distractions, even though it's valid, but we look at these distractions and we don't talk about, well, how is this actually going to help Detroiters? And how does this benefit Detroiters? And so I think it's very interesting to see, if this is true, how the council president addresses it. But again, I go back to, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to what is the vision and message for each of these candidates.
So do you feel, because, we have Derek Henry, and thanks for joining us this evening, Derek, that speaks to the fact that this only proves she can be bought off cheap. So you've done a lot of political consulting. You've been very involved in the political game for quite a while. And we both have just understood the politics of politics. No matter what side, because I've been to Democratic events, I've been to Republican events, and it's the same old thing, just in reverse talk. But with regard to Derrick Henry's point, that's something that is interesting because managing a managing a $3 billion budget will, if you don't have the right people around you, because you can't be an expert at everything as a mayor. You can't be an expert at Detroit water and sewage. You can't be an expert with the Detroit Lighting. You can't be an expert with the Detroit Land Bank. You cannot be an expert with DPD, fire department. You have to have the right people around you. And, when we get further down to the third topic, because that was a good editorial piece that talked about mayoral hopefuls showing signs of Kwame S. style lapses. So the citizens have to pay attention. The unfortunate thing about the debate, that's not till October the 15th, which is 3 weeks before the.
So stop there, Eric. That's the problem that I have is you spend more time on these allegations, but why don't the people of Detroit get at least 2 to 3 debates?
Correct.
To me, that would make more sense to say, you know what? You may do well in one, but 3 debates, we can pretty much understand who you are and what is because there's questions that need to be answered. There's questions that, the same way I would ask about these Jeezy tickets, I would ask, Reverend Kinlock about his true residence. I mean, again, I go back to, we can talk about the narrative and all these distractions, but what is their plan to run the city? What are they going to do when the president or the governor, depending on who that is, says, you know what, I'm not investing these funds in Detroit because you've proven that you can't do right with the money that you have in past years. And so these are the questions of how are you going to create wealth for the city? How are you going to regulate taxes in the city where, people are moving because they're saying that the city's taxes are too high. And so, again, those are issues, Eric, that I think the everyday Detroiter actually cares about. The quality of education. I mean, you and I, Eric, have seen that just get destroyed over the years in terms of the literacy rates that are atrocious in the city of Detroit. And so, again, I go back to those are the plans that Detroiters actually want to hear about, not Jeezy tickets. Matter of fact, it was funny because I would always see Jeezy in Detroit. So now I know why. But my point is that this is in reality, people want to know what are these candidates' plans and not these distractions that make headlines or clickbait.
And to your point about the debates, it's interesting because it's not until October the 15th. Right now, there's only going to be one, but absentee ballots are going out before the debate. And that's the unfortunate thing about people having an opportunity to. It's all, again, we talk about politics all the time.
Those are the politics. There needs to be a debate right now.
Well, it should have been a debate last week. It should have been a debate probably 2 or 3 weeks after the August 4th primary. So a whole month and a half, almost 2 months elapsed from the time of the primary election to them even announcing a debate. And again, that's not going to take place till the 15th of October. And welcome, G Money Hollywood. Again, the topic tonight, G Money, is the Detroit City Charter and Ethics. A column from Darren Nichols that was in the Detroit Free Press that talks about a new mayor of Detroit and will he or she be judged differently than the current mayor. And then the final topic is speaking on another op-ed piece that states mayoral hopefuls showing signs of Kwame S. lapses already. And those lapses, based on the article, was the ticket issue with regard to Council President Mary Sheffield, as well as Robin Kinlock, Mrs. Robin Kinlock, the wife of Pastor Kinlock, getting invited to that same concert by a friend. So those are the 3 topics this evening, Derek. And it's very interesting topics. And to Brandon's point, you're right. There should have been 3 debates. There should have been a debate no more than 2 weeks after the election that was in August, the primary election. Then you have another debate prior to the absentee ballots going out. And then you have a third debate, which is already scheduled, which is the only debate thus far, and that's October the 15th. And that's on a Monday, if I'm not mistaken, Monday or Tuesday.
But, Eric, it's amazing. We're talking about managing $3
billion. Yeah.
And we only get one debate.
But to your point, Brandon, the people have to demand more. I think had the people demanded more, I think there's this perception that it's a done deal on who's going to win the election. And that's unfortunate as well, because some people don't like mudslinging, but mudslinging is par for the course when it comes to politics. And people are making up their mind sometimes on who they like versus who might be the best for the job. And who you like may not always get what you want in a political race.
But Eric, I don't look at it as mudslinging. I look at it look at that. I voted by mail already. See, but you haven't even. Here's my issue with that. And I'm glad you voted, Deborah. But my issue is, have you heard both candidates' platforms? Have you had an opportunity to ask the questions that matter to you? And to me, if we're talking about managing $3 billion of the city's budget, and really taking over the reins of a city that has come back from where we grew up, and that the former, the past Detroit, then to me, the citizens of Detroit deserve at least 2 to 3 debates to have their questions answered, to know where the candidates stand on the issues, to understand the dynamics and some of these questions and things that we're coming out now in the media. We need to give the candidates an opportunity to address them and not just assume.
And in addition to that, Brandon, Karen Winston makes a great point. As a taxpayer, if he or she violates the charter, it is a huge issue. And it should be a huge issue for everyone. And based on the charter, as I read, as I've seen, as I understand, it being voted on back in 2011, became effective on 2012, the charter has been violated. I'm not a lawyer, but I do read and comprehend well. The charter has been violated. So if people, and that's the other, see, one of the problems I'm having is people are willing to look the other way based on who they like. And it should not be that way. You have to hold people accountable, because this is a person that will be held accountable for a $3 billion budget.
Well, Eric, I'll say this. And like I said, I don't have a dog in the fight, but I will say, and oftentimes where there's smoke, there's fire. But correct. Again, this is why it is so important for both candidates to have the opportunity to debate. Not just one time after the absentee ballots have been sent when really the debate doesn't matter, but early enough where people can make informed decisions on who they like, who is the best candidate, who do they trust, and who's the most fiscally responsible with the taxpayer dollars. That's who matters here.
Right. And then to G Money Hollywood, I'm going to have to disagree with you, because it's not a matter about being serious. I'm not going to move away from the fact, G Money, that the charter was violated. The charter is a document that the citizens of the city of Detroit voted on to ensure that politicians and elected officials and public figures are held to a certain standard. If you violate that, you violate a company policy at work. What do? Chances are, depends on the seriousness of the violation, you lose your job. So regardless as to whether or not he asked for debates, we must be very clear that the city charter was violated. That's not in debate. I'm sorry. People can interpret it how they want. They could talk about tomato, but I will only suggest, if you have a problem with the charter, then read it for yourself and interpret it for yourself. And if you interpret it for yourself with an open heart and mind, you will understand that the charter was violated, point blank.
This is going to be a very interesting time, Eric, because I want to watch the debate to see a couple things. These are what I'm looking for in the debate. Number one, I want to understand, there's two things that, as the mayor of Detroit, you need to understand. You need to understand real estate because Detroit is a housing real estate market. You need to understand budgeting because you're the mayor of a major city. But more so is you got to have a plan. And I think, to my knowledge, I have not heard, and I've listened to all the candidates, but I have not heard from either of the candidates yet on what's their plan, not only internally with their team and how they select their team, but what is going to be their plan if they happen to get a governor of the opposite party or get a president of the opposite party. How are you going to deal with that? And here's the other catch is it's different when you are a council person or you are a civil pastor, when you're an individual, but it's another thing when you represent 657,000 people. What are you going to do?
And to G Money, he has another comment about she's well equipped and knows and has been in the fire and knows what it really takes to put the flames out. My question to you, G Money, that $600 million where the taxpayers were overtaxed in the city of Detroit, there was not a fire put out by the council president or the mayor. So I'm not sure what you're looking at as her being well equipped, because I think it's also very interesting that only one of the current city council persons has endorsed her for mayor. So if they felt that she was the type of person to put out the fires, the endorsements would have been flying out the window on August the 5th. So it's obvious that, he has his support, but I just want people to use an open mind, because all of what you said might be fine and dandy. That still does not dismiss the fact that the charter was violated. The charter also includes ethics. So if you violate ethics, that says a lot about you. I'm sorry, that's just my opinion.
Well, Eric, it's going to be very interesting to see how the press deals with this issue, in respect, because again, I wasn't there. No one knows the truth except for the person who is being, alleged. But I want to hear the council president, if it's true, then as a mayor, the buck stops with you. I want to hear from her to say, this is what happened and this is how we'll fix it. When it comes to Reverend Kinloch and some of the allegations around the housing, not living in the city or any other alleges, I want to hear from you. Again, you're running to become the mayor of Detroit, which means the buck stops with you. And I think it's interesting because this is not just an issue, that we're seeing around with other mayors across the nation. It comes down to accountability.
Right.
And again, I think it's going to be interesting to see when those two debate. I'm going to be watching and I'm going to be listening to hear what is their plan, what is the economic plan. We've got an entire east side of Detroit that still looks the way in many cases that it did when I was growing up. What's the plan to change that?
Right, because you can't keep using
to bring industry.
You can't keep using the affordable housing narrative, because affordable housing is very subjective. And it's three different. You have the east side of Detroit that would be comparable to a formula using Grosse Pointe. So, good and well, as far as affordable housing, that is not a plan you could come up with for the east side of Detroit. Then you have the west side of Detroit that borders Oak Park, Ferndale, Southfield. Then you have the north side of Detroit that, Warren, Hazel Park, some of those cities are included. So affordable housing is a nice way of letting people think that the price of housing will come down and suitable for people to afford, but that's not the case. And then you have Detroit as a whole. And I keep telling people, at the end of the day, there are four parts of Detroit: mid, down, Cork, and then Detroit. So you got the three towns in the rest of Detroit. So the three towns look amazing, look fabulous. Of course, Indian Village, you can carve that out as a different part of Detroit. Sherwood Forest, Palmer Park, you carve that out as a different part of Detroit. Rosedale Park. But when you go to the surrounding cities, and I tell people all the time that come visit, when they want to go take a tour of Detroit, you ride through some of these nice neighborhoods, and then, you know, a block outside of Boston Edison, you in a war zone. A block outside Indian Village, you in a war zone. So it's not the same. And people need to understand the equitable factors that goes into trying to tell somebody what Detroit is like is a very inequitable proposition.
You know, Eric, there's a couple things on how we can truly fix downtown Detroit and fix the east side. First of all, this notion that everybody's running towards affordable housing. Well, here's the catch. Here's a little secret. Without industry, affordable housing fails because you got to build housing for something. And the reality is, my question is not so much on affordable housing, but what industries are you bringing into the city to even garner building more housing? Which goes a step further, is that Detroit doesn't necessarily have just a gentrification issue. We've got an occupation issue. Eric, we've got areas in the city that haven't been lived in, have been abandoned for probably 10, 15, 20 years. And so the reality is, when you talk about land mass, we're still paying for folks who have been long gone from Detroit for the last 20 years. And so size matters when it comes to the city, and again, that impacts your taxes.
Right.
The other thing is, what industries, and I think this mayor, whether you like Duggan or not, was on the right mindset of how do we attract industries back to the city. So the next mayor of Detroit, I'm looking, what's going to be your plan to attract growth back to these places like the east side of Detroit? What's going to be your plan economically through transportation to take the people mover up past just 6 Mile, but into Oakland County, which is a whole nother conversation.
Right.
And so those are the things that drive an economy. There's only 3 things, Eric, that you need to run a city: education, transportation, economic development. All that other stuff is just noise.
But one of the 3 you listed is one of the biggest problems in Detroit: education. And we must remember, people have short-sighted memories based on who they like. In 2013, 3 agenda items that the current mayor had was improve education. He didn't do that. Repopulate the city. Depends on who you ask. He did it somewhat. I mean, you bring 1,800 people to the city. That's not really repopulating the city. And reducing crime. Depending on who you ask, they fudged the numbers. So have they really reduced crime? So on 3 of those metrics that he set for a standard, the one that he has failed on woefully is education. And we know that is a fact. Education in the city of Detroit is an abysmal failure and embarrassment. But to bring jobs into the city, Brandon, you have to have an educated workforce. You know, a lot of companies are doing away with the drug testing, but then again, the aptitude test, which is no more than the 4th or 5th grade test, people are not able to pass those aptitude tests to qualify for jobs.
Yeah, I mean, the reality, well, 1 is education, but 2, you know, people don't really, you know, it's interesting. We are literally, and I know growing up in Detroit, you don't think that Canada is right there. We're an international city, whether people want to admit it or not. And so it's interesting that the conversation is still local. We're not a local town. Detroit is a global city.
Right.
And it's about time that was the mantra for the next mayor, whoever that may be, to say that Detroit needs leadership that understands economic development and globalization. Why? Because it's right across the river from you.
Not just across the river, but there will be 3 entryways right into the city in a little bit more than, well, less than a year. You have 2 bridges, you will have 2 bridges, and you have a tunnel. So if people don't understand the globalization of that, then that's a major problem. Then to Mr. 1213, I have asked Pastor Kenlock to come on the show. We're just waiting to schedule it. I will reach out to the Sheffield folks again to have both of them come on at separate times or even together. We'll see. But there has to be avenues for people to understand what the platform, agenda, and ideas for moving the city forward are. saying that someone has been somewhere for the last 12 years, that's all good and dandy. But what really has progressed in the city of Detroit as a whole in the last 12 years? There are a few issues I can tell you have not at all. Growing the city in education. We will never be able to get beyond the fact of education. I do know in talking to Kinloch, based on even during the primary, he has one of the best education plans that he has presented. And he's even talking about bringing an educational czar. You know, so it's not like you're taking over the school board or the superintendent, but I find it quite interesting that people want to say, well, they don't need to take over the school system because they are elected as well. Well, that didn't stop Gretchen Whitmer for creating MyLeap. And MyLeap is another bureaucracy of education up in Lansing that pretty much put the superintendent and elected school board members, state school board members, on the shelf because she created MyLeap. And no one is complaining about that, but they have a problem with a mayor or another division taking hold in Detroit to address the educational problem that's been a long-standing problem for years, pre-COVID.
Can I just say this, Eric? You know, this is the problem with education, is that it's so much money in it that everybody cares about everything but the kids. And when you look at it, you know, we need to, as a city, we need local control. We need mayoral control. I'm sorry. Because the reality is no one in Escanaba should be telling a principal or an administrator in Southwest Detroit how to run their schools coming from Lansing.
Right.
And what we're seeing is that you've got so many people focused on special interest groups and all of these other things rather than focus on the quality education of the child. And so when you think about school choice, which certain groups don't like, you're really talking about giving kids in Detroit on the east side, on the west side, in Southwest Detroit, you're giving them a fighting chance to compete.
Right.
And what we're seeing is that Lansing is fighting to the death of that because they don't want our kids to succeed. I'm just going to say it. And how do I know that that's true? Because did I not read a story in the Detroit Free Press that 4 young people, brave people, took it upon the state to sue because they weren't learning a damn thing?
They took it upon the state to sue the state. Not just that, Brandon. They cannot even find a local lawyer to take on their case. I give you one guess if you were to ask me where did they get their lawyer from to sue the state of Michigan. Way out in California. A lawyer from California was the representative legal counsel for the 4 students. I think all 4 of them may have been from Osborne to sue for a quality education. That quality education is still not being given. That's why people need to understand there's profit in dumbness. There's profit in miseducation. There's profit in not educating. And people need to understand that for a fact. There's no, the advent of the, as a result of the crime bill, 1994, and the private prison system, they looked at the numbers. They saw that a lot of people that were going to jail had no more than a 4th grade education. So it's no coincidence that 35 of the 50 states in America have the 3rd grade reading law. I mean, it's no coincidence. They know. You have analytical people that look at the numbers and see what the likelihood of someone not doing well in school and 1 of 3 places they will be in the future: dead, in jail, or homeless. They know this. This is a fact. So it's no secret that the educational system is what it is, and particularly in urban communities.
Eric, and I agree with you. I love this because there is poverty. There's power in plight, and it's unfortunate. And so before I go, these would be my main questions. If the council, Madam Council President, and Reverend Kinloch were able to come on your show, the first question would be, what is your plan to get Detroiters back to work. Because the reality is that when you think about it, there's so many Detroiters who have stopped looking because they're underskilled, underdeveloped, and don't have the network, all the talent in the world, but they don't have the network. And so what is your plan to get Detroiters, East Side, Southwest Detroiters back to work? Number two is, what is your plan to attract industry to the city of Detroit? What's your real plan? Not a talking point. What is your real plan to attract industry, new industries, to the city of Detroit? Number three, and this is the real issue, is I laugh when people say, oh, crime's dropping. Crime's not dropping. Crime's just not being reported.
Correct.
And so what is the plan to reduce crime? Which, here's the catch, Eric, is a direct factor of education. You fix the education, you fix the crime.
But like Karen Wilson has also said, there's profit in poverty. Poverty is a result of lack of education. Poverty leads to more crime. So, you know, everything that you want for your three wish lists for the mayor, be it Council President Sheffield or Pastor Kinlock, those are three things that need to be addressing. And then, even as a segue into the article that Darren Nichols wrote, he was very succinct in talking about the fact that there would be no honeymoon period for Sheffield or Kinlock. There would not be. You need to understand that Duggan had a 4-year honeymoon period. Those first 4 years was a gimme, a mulligan, as they say in golf. He had a mulligan. So the playing field will not be equal as it was in the past. Then you have the job will be bigger than just managing the city. The winner will also have to take on the responsibility of making sure that the Detroit image is intact. Because by so many people's standards, you have 150 pastors throughout the state of Michigan, many of them black. They've already endorsed Duggan for governor, saying that the reason why they did it, because they giving him credit for making Detroit the comeback city that people think it is. And if it was a comeback city, industry would be coming here. And again, I'm gonna go back to education. Education would still not be a problem.
You know, I'm really amazed how the last mayor decides to run for governor, and he abandons his party because he sees the writing on the wall, and suddenly,
well, when you say you see the writing on the wall, what are you referring to? The bills being due?
Well, let's look at the country. I mean, right now, you know, the left is you know, they're still trying to find their way. They're still trying to find their message. But here, I'll go a step further. You know, you mentioned something that was very interesting. I would take the council president or Reverend
Kinlock,
Reverend Kinlock, and I would say whoever is the victor that night, there are the individual that they need to study, because we've already done this. The individual that they need to study is Maynard Jackson. And here's why. Atlanta has already been the prototype, going back 30, 40 years, of what the city of Detroit can be. Let's be realistic. We're talking about a city that is 60 to 70% African American. You're talking about a city that is international in nature, so much to the point where Ambassador Andrew Young, when he visited Detroit, said that he would have killed as the mayor to have an international port in Atlanta, which means money, which means industry, which means revenue. But the other thing is that when you start talking about what Detroit can be, and I think this is where vision, forget all the other stuff right now. Let's just talk about vision and where Detroit can be. When you think about Atlanta, Atlanta is Black excellence. When you talk about the level of wealth in Atlanta, the level of entrepreneurs in Atlanta, the level of industry, if you are a person of color, Atlanta is a place to go where you can thrive because there's opportunity. Detroit has the exact same, if not more, opportunity because we have all of the tenants. We have the space, we have the industry, we have the ports, We have the globalization of being next door to an international city. So what's the holdup? And so I would challenge both Reverend Kinloch and Council President Sheffield, take a playbook out of Maynard Jackson and study what he did when it came to convincing the banks to invest in urban communities and urban entrepreneurship. It matters.
And one of the things that he also did was not just he, but there was a cooperation amongst all of the municipalities around Atlanta. They work together. Atlanta stretches north, south, east, and west as an area. It's just not Atlanta. You have Gwinnett County up north. You have Smyrna to the southeast. You have Carrollton to the west. They monopolize the area by everyone getting along for a common goal of improving Atlanta as a whole. That's one of Detroit's hang up. Far too many people in Detroit want to be the chief. Far too many people don't want to take the role of being Indians as well. So when you talk about Atlanta, the prototype, because you also had the Russell Construction Company, it played a very big role in the growth of Atlanta by being one of the main construction management companies that built the airport that was named after Jackson. It's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport.
But Eric, you say Russell Construction, I say Jenkins Construction.
Right.
And
you
so
have
my point, and so my point is that we've got to have bigger conversations other than, no offense, UAW. I love the UAW, but the reality is, why do we not have more people of color in the building trades? Why do we not have more developers? And I'm sorry, but 20 or 30 developers in a city of 600,000 people, it's not good enough. And so again, we've got to have those hard big boy, big girl conversations. And the next mayor has got to be able to do that in saying, we want to be at the table, not just
not on the menu
thumbs or a handout. And here's the reality. You're talking about a city where the entire city council minus one is African American. You're talking about a city that is 70% African American. You're talking about a city that has more wealth concentrated in Southeast Michigan than many other areas. When you look at the rate of wealth that's coming in and coming out of downtown. And so we've got to have serious conversations about ownership. And until we do that, that's when we will see the Detroit that is what I call, the city that sits on the water, the global city that it is. But, we've got to think differently as residents. So again, I hope that Reverend Sheffield and Madam Council President can come on your show, because it's time we had some big boy, big girl conversations on where do we want to take the city.
Right. And then someone asked, is Marcellus Bryce related to you?
I get that question all the time. I don't think so, but who knows?
And then before you go, there's a comment that was directed to you. I'm sure he understands and realizes that it's designed for urban city like Detroit to never be given adequate equal resources to be competitive. It's by design, so it would not change.
So I disagree with that for this reason. Atlanta was the head of the Confederacy.
Yep.
Head of Jim Crow. And they made it. If they can do it, we can too.
And I agree. And I go through Atlanta twice a year on my way to Talladega College for Alumni Weekend or Founders Weekend, which is a homecoming for Talladega College. And I spent a lot of time there, over the years, and they've made it. They have done something.
Eric, all we need to do is study what Maynard Jackson, Herman Russell, and Sherry Pratt and Andrew Young.
Andrew Young. Actually, his brother's Andrew Young.
came together and said, this is where we're taking the city.
And essentially bring those four people up because once upon a time, Detroit had, I don't want to use the word kingmakers, but they had people that will sit down everyone and say, and I don't believe in that term of it's not your turn, but they would have at least set up a succession plan for people to be in the right place at the right time to move Detroit forward. And that's something that has not happened. Sheree Tanadar would not have been in office had it not been for people not letting go of their egos and not running at the time that they ran. You know, he's there because people did not want to take a step back when they should have taken a step back. And then to Deborah Harris, to your comment, the settlement money, there was a lawsuit settlement of $94 million. And one of the litigants for that, I will have on my show in the very near future, Deborah. I definitely have Jamaria Hall is his name. He was one of the litigants, one of the lead students that got the lawsuit started for quality education in the state, in the city of Detroit. And everybody want to make it about Rick Snyder. He just happened to be the governor at the time when the lawsuit was filed. So it wasn't them suing him. They sued the state of Michigan as a whole. And then she had another comment. A historic settlement reached between the state and Detroit students call for. Yeah, so I have him on the show very soon. Yeah, and Brandon had to drop off. He had another event to get to. So I want to thank him for being on this evening. And I'm reading the comments, Deborah. You know, we get to them as soon as we can. So Mr. 1213, and I thank everybody for tuning in and watching. In 1973, Atlanta, Detroit had elected the first black mayors. Atlanta went on an incline, which is true, and Detroit went on a decline. And that's one of the things. It's interesting that you say that, Mr. 1213, because the election of Coleman Alexander Young was necessary. And that was one of them first that was necessary. I could roll with that, but it wasn't just electing someone to be elected. Because remember, if people recall, he got blown out in the primary in August of 1973. And he made I won't say miraculous comeback, but he did make a comeback in the general election of 1973 and went on to become mayor of city Detroit and held that position for 20 years. So it can be done with regards to everyone keep talking about the results from the primary election in August and the percentage of the vote that the winner got, which was the council president, versus what the second place finisher got, which was Reverend Kinlock at 17%. And that's a 34% difference. But we also must take into consideration voter turnout was piss poor on a day where the weather was just nice outside, and why people did not go out and vote is beyond me. It's sad, actually. Mr. Duckett, when will the council president votes for non-black contractors, political donors that deliver toxic dirt? And see, that's something, you know, unfortunately, and I'm not sure how they're going to do the questions for the debate on August 15th that would be held at WXYZ Channel 7 ABC studio in Detroit. So I'm not sure how they're going to do the questions, but Mr. Duckett, this would have been a good question for the audience if it had been an open debate with guests and audience in the crowd, but it would not be. And I heard this firsthand from Chuck Stokes, who will be moderating the event. It is not open to the public. You might have some of the handlers from both sides of the campaign, that be Pastor Kinlock and Council President Sheffield, that might be in the studio at the time, but there will not be an audience. And I'm not sure how the questions are being taken. So that's one of the unfortunate things about having only one debate, because there could have been three different debates with three different styles. We see Detroit needs to bring back distributive education and industrial arts into the school system. They're trying to bring some of the industrial arts, but they also need to bring back some of the electives such as, swimming, art, music. And I know, my kids grew up in the Plymouth Canton School District, and they had an opportunity to participate in all kinds of electives that I was like, wow, I would have loved to have been in the school district that offered, upwards of 75 to 100 electives and clubs for the students out here in the Plymouth Canton complex. And then you have a nice amount of charter schools out here that are doing the same to stay competitive with the public school. Well, charter schools are public as well, but to stay competitive with the traditional public schools. So that's something that needs to be talked about with regards to a new mayor and what their stance on education is going to be. I do know that Pastor Kinlock is talking about adding to his cabinet and putting an educational czar into that role. So we will see what happens. Let me see. G Money Hollywood, the Atlanta, when it comes to education, makes it happen at the collegiate level because of the college's prestige from nationwide. It's not because they're a K through 12 system that comes from the local student body. You're right, because the K through 12 system has an issue there, but you have Georgia Tech, you have Morehouse, you have Spelman, you have Clark Atlanta, which is Clark Atlanta University, the AC, I think it's called the AUC complex or the AC complex where the black colleges are. Then you have Georgia State, which is also in downtown Atlanta. Now you have Kennesaw State. Then to the west, you have West Georgia University, which used to be called West Georgia College. That's in Carrollton. And you have the Northeast, you have University of Georgia, Athens, Georgia is where it's located. So they do have a lot, and all their colleges are not easy to get into. My daughter went to University of Georgia as a freshman. She was one of the lucky few from out of state to get into the University of Georgia. So they are very selective. Georgia Tech, very selective. Spelman and Morehouse, we know both of them are selective. We have Morris Brown that is now back open and functioning fully after initiative they had. Then you have Clark Atlanta University that is doing very well. So it's a lot of competition down there. And you're right, it's not a result, as far as the prestige, it's not a result of the K through 12 system. It's a result of what they bring to the table in their colleges throughout the state, and particularly those in the metropolitan Atlanta area. Again, you have Georgia State, Georgia Tech, Kennesaw, Morehouse, Spelman, Clark Atlanta, and Morris Brown. So they have a plethora. And then one of the things that they also did, and Brandon is gone, when they decided to make I think it's called the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, they involved the black community with that. Yes, there was some gentrification because that's going to happen when you're bringing in that type of growth to the city and a new part of the city. And you had the Braves to move further north from the city. So as you go throughout Atlanta, you have a Lenox Square area, which is north of the city. You have the whole airport area, and Atlanta's the busiest airport in the country. I'm not sure in the world, but they definitely are the busiest airport in the country due to so much trade and economic opportunities is through Atlanta. So there's a lot that Detroit can definitely learn from Atlanta, as Brandon stated when he was on. And there's a lot that the people have to be able to understand. But again, I just encourage, you can download. You don't even have to download. You can just go to the internet, Google, and pull down the charter and read it for yourself. And, somebody made a comment. I think it was G Money made a comment about how pastors get gifts. That's part of the core for a pastor. They have anniversaries every year. They have birthdays. Yes, the pastor does get gifts, but it's not a violation of an ethics with regards to churches and how they support and treat their pastors. Be it a situation of her selling the tickets, which is one of the rumors, but even before the selling of the tickets, the violation was already created by accepting the tickets in the fact that they were asked for by her, allegedly, and then sold, allegedly. So again, I read you the exact wording of the city charter as it relates to gifts and gratuities. If you want to look it up for yourself, section 2-106.4, gifts and gratuities, and it spell it out specifically as it relates to the city charter in a violation, be it alleged or a blatant violation of the city charter that was voted on in November 2011, became effective January 1st, 2012, and this was all done by the citizens of Detroit. And it does not matter if it's a 4% turnout or a 99% turnout. Those that voted made the decision for the population in the city of Detroit with regards to the city charter. So I want to thank everyone for listening, watching, liking, sharing tonight. And so your guess is correct. Yeah, incorrect about the state of Detroit students. Oh, no, a different one. Let me see. Your guess is correct, but incorrect about the assessment of Detroit versus Atlanta. They have industries, but Detroit has only one industry. Detroit is not. Well, the point he's trying to make, G Money, is Detroit has not utilized the international opportunity that they have by Canada being right across the Detroit River from us. And that in and of itself is one thing, but again, Detroit will continue to be hampered by the lackluster educational system that still currently is negatively impacting Black boys and girls, as well as negatively impacting the necessary growth of the city. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining me this evening. Brandon Bryce was my guest. And again, I will have, to Deborah Harris' point, I will have one of the students involved in the lawsuit suing the state of Michigan for quality education. And I will nail down the appearance of Pastor Kinlock and hopefully get Council President Mary Sheffield on the show as well. Until next time, enjoy the rest of your evening. Enjoy the rest of your week. Peace and love to you all. And I want to thank you for listening. And I also want to give a happy birthday out to the mother of my children. Her birthday is tomorrow. I will never tell her age because she would not want her age to be told. But happy birthday. And again, see you all next Monday. Good evening. Good night. Peace.